Welcome back. Another episode of Our Interesting Times. It is my pleasure to have Peter Quinones back on the show. Pete, of course, is the host of the eponymous Pete Quinones show. Pete, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Tim. What's going on? What are we going to talk about today?
Well, last time we talked was November, and we were talking about, what's going to happen. Was a lot going to happen?
That was a decade ago, right?
Yes. So I think we're less than a month into the second Trump administration, Trump 47. And it started out just with a flurry of activity. It hasn't slowed down. I think it was Aaron McIntyre's referred to as the sort of flooding the zone strategy, and just keep it going with these executive orders, these sort of executive or administrative moves against the administrative state, the deep state, if you will. And the biggest thing, or at least one of the biggest things, was this executive order shutting down United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and it's exposed sort of basically the scope and scale as so much of what the federal government and of course those agencies or departments, or not departments but organizations, NGOs if you will, and news outlets, media outlets, that they're feeding off the trough, and basically it's like a huge criminal enterprise that's been exposed. And so you've been following, I listened to your show. It is quite stunning to watch what's happening. I am tempted to believe that it's all just fake. It's not really happening. So what do you have to say? Because it's just too
Yeah,
much.
yeah, that's one of those things is like, because of everything that we've seen in our life, and especially in the last, I would say 20 years, anything that looks like change, we have to be skeptical of, especially if that change, which I'm reminded of constantly by Spurgs on the internet, if that change doesn't involve calling out or persecuting a certain minority group that has holds a lot of power, um, then nothing ever happens. This can't be real. Yet I'm looking at a video of the Jewish Family Services in San Diego, and they're packing it up and laying off over 100 people because they their funding has been cut off because USAID has been shut down. So yeah, it seems fake because you know we didn't expect anything to happen. I mean, there are people who didn't expect the J6 prisoners to get to be pardoned or anything like that. So with that happening, I mean, that's enough to be happy. Hey, the guy got reelected. Those people get their lives back and everything. Those people get their lives back. But then you see things slowly start to be dismantled. You think it's fake because, how could it be real? Apparently, because there aren't trains full of millions of migrants yet. Well, there won't be, but I assume that a lot of self deportation is happening because I know people who move in migrant communities, and they're telling me that people are just up and leaving and they're going home. And that's anecdotal, but life's anecdotal. But it seems like some good things are happening, and the USAID thing one is huge. I've written I wrote a couple things back in the day for antiwar.com, and one of the things that we always tracked was where this money was going, what was paying for it, and USAID would always come up. It would always come up as dark money going to places, feeding revolutions. I remember doing an episode years ago on the takedown of Yugoslavia and how that was basically the National Endowment for Democracy after they bragged to the New York Times about how they were going to basically do the things the CIA wouldn't do. And, NED run and founded by all the usual suspects, and how they were financed by USAID. And yeah, so what are we seeing? It's hard to know. I have people telling me that, well, they're cutting off the money to this certain group, but they're going to figure out a way to they're making sure the money keeps flowing to that certain group and everything. 3.8 million to Israel. It's like, yeah, 3.8 million to Israel. I mean, 3.8 billion to Israel. a bunch of billions to Egypt. Yeah, that is not going to stop as long as those two countries exist, unless they go to war again. Because basically, that's just a payoff so that they don't fight each other.
Mhm.
I mean, that's literally what that is. That's what people don't realize. It's payoff money. Say, don't kill each other. Don't war against each other. And so I have people saying, "Oh, well, they'll get the money to them somehow or another." And I'm like, "Okay, so tell me where, tell me how. We know it was going through USAID. How are they doing it now? I don't know, but it's definitely gonna. Okay, how do you know that? Give me your proof. You're just theorizing. We've actually been shown receipts now about certain things, so we know that certain things that we thought in the past were true. And it seems like people just want to keep losing and make up things and be like, oh, well, the money that money's going to keep flowing. It's like, okay, well, how's it gonna flow? Because I'm not denying that. I'm not denying that it could keep flowing, but tell me how, show me where. And you know until then, until I know that, until I see the fruits of it, then I have to assume what I'm seeing with my eyes is essentially real.
Yeah, what's a lot of these crazy. Obviously, they highlight some of the loonier, crazier funding or programs that USAID funded. Was like a transgender opera in Colombia or Guatemala or something.
Yeah, so I mean, Mike Benz on Tucker Carlson's show, I mean, really exposed himself as a snake on that show, as far as I'm concerned.
Uh,
Was basically promoting, saying, well, soft power works, and USAID was providing the funds for soft power, and maybe these transgender operas do things. It's like, no, just shut it all down.
well, who does it
Just
work
shut
for
it all
though?
down. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Who benefits? Cui bono?
Well, so what is Samantha Power doing now? Didn't her and Victoria Newland after left the state go to work for USAID?
Yeah, well, I know Victoria Newland was, I guess, what do they call that? The ambassador, the head of, or the person who basically is the voice of, you know, people talk to figure out where the dark money is going. But yeah, Samantha Power was another one. So yeah, I mean, why would these people specifically, like arch neocons? I mean, like, I don't even consider them to be Americans, and I don't think Samantha Power is. Doesn't she speak with a British accent? Yeah, and I consider Victoria Nuland to be Ukrainian.
Well, she married
Like
that
I
that
consider.
she married that patriot Cass Sunstein. So
Oh, that's Samantha. That's Samantha Power, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And obviously Victoria Nuland is married to Robert Kagan, which is cone in Russian. So yeah, these are people who are fighting a 300-year-old blood libel by Khmelnytsky, 400 years now. Khmelnytsky and his Cossacks basically killing a bunch of lunatic Jews who decided the Messiah was coming so that they could just start murdering people and taking their land and taking their property and everything. And Khmelnytsky had to come in, and as is what we
This was
know of
the
the
was this
history.
a sabotage Zevi thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's that's where a lot of a
Yeah.
lot of the lore comes from.
17th
But
century. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and I'm covering on the show with Dr. Matthew Raphael Johnson. Now we're slowly reading through Alexander Solzhenitsyn's 200 Years Together. We're on page 70 and we're on episode 13. So it's probably going to be a year's project of doing this. And it just shows over and over again that, you know, especially when it comes to Ukraine, which I think all of this ties into exactly what's happening in Ukraine today. This is not, and the hatred towards Russia um, that you see. This is they were using USAID to fund their blood hatred, their ethnic animosity, and I think it's interesting that people like Colonel McGregor and even Judge Knapp and Tucker Carlson have actually said this. It's like said, this seems to be an ethnic conflict, and the people who are doing this aren't even Americans.
Yeah, Gregor started talking like Henry Ford on that. Was it the guy out of Scotland? What's it, the guy with the hat?
Yeah,
Uh,
I
what's
can't
his
remember
name?
what that guy's name
Yeah,
is.
the
Yeah, I
good
can't
Labor
remember that
guy.
guy's name.
Um,
Yeah.
but he said, yeah, this is Netanyahu represents international Jewish power and finance. And
If
then
he would have said Jewry, I would have fallen out of my chair.
so there's and then even I guess there was an interview I saw with was it Colonel Davis or Davies,
Yes.
and they were talking, and again Tucker was talking sort of in a roundabout way, talking about, they love the Soviet Union as atheists, they hate it now that it's Christian. Who's they?
Yeah.
Cold
Well,
Warriors? Are
that
these
yeah,
Cold Warriors? Trotskyites? Well, yeah.
yeah. Anyone who's listening who hasn't heard that yet, go to Tucker's interview with Colonel Davis. Start around 42 minutes and just play it, and you just hear him basically saying that these, you know, yeah, he's basically calling them out, and still, once you cross that, I think you know this, Tim. Once you cross that line, there's no coming back.
No, no, it's
Yeah, and
you
he,
can't walk that back.
yeah, yeah, he's a he. Yeah, I'm of the opinion that Tucker's his podcast, like 80% of the episodes are not for us. He's like speaking to the White House and speaking to people in power. I think because I'm under the impression, I agree with Dr. Jones that he might be representing a WASP elite that is sick of this crap.
This was our country, darn it. You took it.
Well, they
We
did.
let you in and you took over.
Oh, if only there were history books to teach us that, like, I don't know, Jewish encyclopedias and Jewish virtual library. And oh, wait a minute, that's right, they tell us.
Well, it is. I mean, then you have USAID, which was created by John F. Kennedy in 1961. It was I think it was a Foreign Assistance Act of 1961 that directed the president to create such an agency, and of course the executive branch creates it and pretty much fleshes it out, if you will, determines how it operates and all that. So much of the agencies, how it operates, its various offices and all that, at least theoretically, is controlled by the executive. Obviously, it hasn't been controlled by executive for decades. It's sort of a rogue agency outfit, if you will, just there enriching people, and it's just basically largely there's some ideological element to it, because if you look at some of these programs like AID, NED, the International Republican Institute, these are just again soft power, and of course in Ukraine it's not very soft. I think they have over 1 million dead in Ukraine now, so it's not very soft. It can get very hard quick, but it's kind of funny because you look at U.S. Whether it's the Peace Corps or international aid in these things, or the CIA funding modern art or literary magazines or publications, it was an attempt during the Cold War to sort of fight the propaganda war against the Soviet Union. And it's kind of interesting to note that U.S. aid programs and I guess soft power abroad became more perverse and gay as the U.S. became more perverse and gay. It sort of mirrors the long march to the institutions, and it's very typical how they simply don't know the same crowd that we're talking about, the Saturday people. They don't know boundaries and they just push it too far, and they just push this. They could have kept this if they just kept moderate about it, kept it somewhat reasonable. They could have kept this thing going a lot longer. And now once it's exposed, and I think a while back, I think I asked you not too long ago, do elections matter in an occupied government? Well, I guess evidently they do matter somewhat because personnel is policy, and Trump apparently came into office, and it appears. I remember there was talk about an Article 2 presidency, and was it Section F was it Section F of
Oh, I
firing?
know.
Idea of sort of firing the bureaucracy. And there's some talk of Trump doing this in his first term, but then he was nudged out of office in 2020, as you all remember. But it appears that they had a game plan going into here. I mean, they hit the ground running, and they haven't stopped. So they're with Elon Musk, and yeah, I guess it's because Elon Musk is involved because he just wants to put a chip in my brain. If I listen to some people, because it's a coalition of people, some very powerful people who knew that the system was being run into the ground, run off the tracks, if you will, and a correction was made, which means that people running this show, if you will, probably have differing motivations. But that doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't cheer it on and support it from time to time. At the same time, providing pressure and criticism when necessary. Wouldn't you agree?
No, I agree wholly at 100%. The good thing about having competing interests is that no one's going to, not one group is going. If one group gets takes over and gets their way, then we're basically back to what we had before. Now, if that group is a group that aligns with us 40 or 50%, maybe even 30%, it's a lot better than what we had in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm not somebody who, you know, I had I had a long libertarian phase where, I purity spiraled and everything had to be perfect. And I let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And I try not to do that anymore. Although I do, obviously have my biases towards certain things, certain subjects. But yeah, I think having competing factions in there is actually a good thing because not one of them is going to get everything they want. As we were talking about before we started recording, you know, people will say Trump is the most Zionist president of all time. I don't even know if he like knows what a Zionist is, and I think if you like gave him the definition of a Zionist, if you asked him if he was one, he may even say no. I think he's just one of these people who he's a boomer who has believed something his whole life and he's been dealing with certain groups his whole life and he continues to deal with them. That's not a good thing if you're, quote unquote, the most powerful man in the world. But seeing these groups and seeing that he's definitely surrounded himself with people who want change. And I think the reason they want things to change, at least I'm seeing more and more people using the term administrative state. I mean, like all day on Twitter, people I've never even heard of, and they're people who weren't using it 6 months ago, which is a good thing because we've had the administrative state for almost 100 years now, and look where it's gotten us. So
Well, that's
I don't
only
know.
legitimate if you're expanding government at a breakneck speed.
Right, right.
If you use administrative power to check the state, fire, get rid of agencies, and hold it accountable, then all of a sudden it's illegitimate. But apparently, if you're Woodrow Wilson or FDR, it's perfectly fine because it's progressive. You
Well,
can't
yeah. I
be
mean,
you can be administratively progressive, but you can't be administratively regressive.
yeah. You
Yeah.
mentioned that the executive was supposed to be in charge of USAID and everything, and I mean, we haven't had a real executive since Nixon, and look what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who understood how to um, it, use that executive power, who was on our side. And I don't even consider Bill Clinton or even Barack Obama to be to have wielded executive power. They were more run by the administrative state, in my opinion. And it just seems that that's the way it's been since Nixon. And a lot of people will say, "Oh, well, really started a New Deal, or it started World War I, or they want to go back to Spanish American War, whatever, Teddy Roosevelt and expansion empire." Yeah, I really see like the early 1970s after they got rid of Nixon. That's when you can see a real ramping up of the power, especially after the 1973 war. And I'm not talking about Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so Trump is wielding executive power. Some of the things he's doing, if they are carried out and they are carried out to completion, will benefit will benefit us. But I also think, and I was saying this when I realized that there was a group of tech elites that wanted Trump in power. What we refer to as the PayPal mafia. It's not something we came up with, and there was a Wikipedia page for Christ's sake. We we knew that there were groups who saw that if radical change didn't happen, they couldn't keep going with what they wanted to do. They're used to doing business a certain way. They can't do business a certain way if it was keeping going in that direction. If the regime would have kept going the way it is. So what we could see is, if we don't see a complete dismantling of the regime, which is you'd have to be Pollyanna to think it's going to happen, to be able to predict. I think they're going to take down this whole administrative regime. No, what you're probably seeing is people who are trying to dismantle as much as they can so that they can keep doing the things. Musk wants to go to Mars. Um, People like a lot of the little tech guys are really interested in AI, and they don't want China to be ahead of us in AI. They want to control AI. They want AI to be run. They want it to be the United States who controls it. So I think that's a lot of the self-interest that you're seeing. And one thing that I did learn a long time ago that I think is true is that another person's self-interest can benefit you. I mean, inventions, things that make your life easier. Sure, that person invented that because they wanted to make money, but it also could make your life easier. Henry Ford inventing the car, things like that. He wanted to do that to become wealthy and to have a legacy and be remembered for all time. Him having his newspaper is just a bonus. But I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing a struggle for power between some tech elites, the dying neocons, but also a faction of Jewish power that I wouldn't call exactly neocons, but I think they're ones that understand that the golem that they created with the woke is coming back to bite them in the ass.
They're like Bill Ackman.
Yeah, people like that.
This is why
they will.
That's why you have a war on DEI now, right?
Yeah. Or Paul Singer. I mean, Paul Singer is somebody who he's basically, if you really look into it, he's responsible for the Steele dossier. That came out of his. What was that? The Free Beacon. So, and then he
bankrolls Chris Rufo, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, the Manhattan Institute. We talked about that on our new little panel show, the Inquisition, where you have Chris Rufo who's talking about the new right. We're going to take down DEI. We're going to take down the woke and all this stuff. And then Bill Kristol is on the board of the Manhattan Institute, and,
who was a recipient, received a lot of money from USAID. Turns out,
of course,
through a series of LLCs. It's like money laundering. It's like
it was one of the one of the funnier things that I saw today was that Chris Rufo was trying to find it because I responded to it in a certain way. Chris Rufo was talking about being careful about who you hire or who you have in your sphere. And a friend of mine had posted up, trying to find, he said, Rufo had posted up, he said, the right must be more selective in the people it welcomes into the firmament. Conservatives have been locked out of elite institutions for so long, many will accept any celebrity that signals opposition to the left, even a common pimp with a social media following. And he's talking about Andrew Tate. They're talking about the Trump saying the Tate brothers. And my buddy Ham put up here, he goes, absolutely, the right must safeguard against undesirable elements that signal right wing, but are in fact avowed enemies of the people. And he has a picture of Bill Kristol, who is on the board of the Manhattan Institute, which Chris Rufo works for. So out of one side of his mouth, he's like, we can't have a pimp be, we can't be championing a pimp, even though he just hired a porn star to write for him. But he also, he's got Paul Singer on his board, and he's got Bill Kristol and people like that on his board. So yeah, these people are, they're slime. they're snakes, and it's more and more of. I think it's one of the things that we do with the Old Glory Club is more and more we're only trusting people that we've actually met in real life and pressed the flesh with and spend time with.
uh, Now, of course, there's been a lot of opposition by the courts. Uh, Various judges, federal judges, have ruled that Trump's executive orders are unconstitutional for whatever reason. Apparently, he's not, the Treasury is not allowed to look into how the money's spent. Apparently, there's a constitutional right to promote transgenderism, in Romania, because if you shut down that program, but it appears none of those initial rulings have been overruled. But if there is a confrontation with the court, here we have what we have is what they call a constitutional crisis. I just call it constitutional politics because really, the job of the executive is to interpret the Constitution as he executes the law. The job of the Congress is to interpret the Constitution as it writes and passes legislation. And the job of the judiciary is to interpret the Constitution if it adjudicates disputes. What you really have is concurrent review, which is really how the system was supposed to work. But that, since Justice Marshall and Marbury versus Madison, it's been presumed that the Supreme Court has the sole right for judicial review in all these disputes. Of course, it didn't really become a big issue probably until the 19th century, or sorry, the 20th century, particularly World War One. A lot of the rulings that ratified some of the abuses of the Woodrow Wilson administration, and of course the conflicts around the New Deal with that National Recovery Act, and of course then we off for the races in the 50s with Brown versus Board of Education and the era of judicial activism and these things. So what would be, in your opinion, would be a proper response by Trump to any judicial blocking of this of his administrative agenda to get things under control?
I might tweet out something like, "He who saves his country does not violate any law."
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I mean, he tweeted that on Saturday, and it's Monday, and it's a holiday, so a lot didn't happen today. So, yeah, I'm interested to see what happens tomorrow. Like I said, you never know what's going to happen. Especially, it just seems like in the last 28 days, so much has happened that there are flooding the zone, as they say it. Well, I mean, we've already seen. I think the difference with this administration is hitting the ground running like they did. They also have lawyers. They have
Mhm.
teams of lawyers ready to go in there. They've already had a couple. They had a big one reversed with getting access to allowing Doge to have access to multiple computer systems within the government.
Is it
I
true there are millions of people that are 150 years old getting Social Security payments?
I don't think it's millions. I think it's like in the hundreds. I think it's in the hundreds from what I saw, but it is, of course. I mean, as soon as I heard stuff like that, where it was like, people have been dead for a while. I'm like, I remember hearing in like 2003 or 2004, someone had said, "Oh, Osama bin Laden's still getting paid by the CIA," and I'm like, "Oh, I mean, that might explain it." Now, who knows? But the, I mean, I just think that one of two things is going. Well, one of three things is going to happen. One, they're just going to put their people into the courts and get things reversed. Two, they're going to ignore them and just do whatever they want and just go full Article 2 and just go, all the power and authority is invested in the executive. Okay, well, that's the route I'm going. I mean, that's the one I would like to see more than anything else. Or three, they'll just lose.
Mhm.
And, if they lose, we were talking about this on the Old Glory Club live stream on Thursday. Our friend Lou Templar brought this up. He said, if we lose, if, and when I say we, I'm talking about like the people that would be more protected under a Trump regime or a Vance regime, with free speech and being able to go on Twitter and still keep your job, get fired but get rehired when you say you couldn't pay me to marry outside of my ethnicity, like our friend Big Balls did. the if if this all goes to crap and 2028 rolls around and a Gavin Newsom or just another apparatchik of the old regime gets put in there, we're in trouble. They're, I mean, I'm predicting they are going to come after us. They will, and it will be ugly. And I kind of wonder how we avoid violence even with what's happening now, because that's what the left is. And I have people who've been scouring forums to see what leftists are talking about, and they're talking about forming militias and saying this is what the Second Amendment was for. We better use it for ourselves. Googling stuff like how do we form a militia, which is just genius. And the way I look at it is as somebody who has, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I would say I definitely know a lot more than the average person about the Spanish Civil War. I don't trust these.
Well, the fact that there was a Spanish Civil War puts you heads above.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look
You
at,
can even
I look at,
you can even name the decade that it occurred.
I know, I know the month, I know the month and year it started and ended. The, I know the dates it started and ended actually. It's just the most important, one of the most important
Wait, I
happenings
thought the
outside of
Spanish
World War
Civil War
One
is
and
like the
Two.
French Revolution; it never ended, right?
Well, basically, yeah, for the left, it hasn't. And I look at a lot of the leftists in this country. And when I say leftists, I'm not talking about a specific group. I'm talking about, a hodgepodge of just absolute lunatics. I look at them as no different than the red Republicans and the anarchists and the libertarian and
Mm.
the left libertarians of the Spanish in the Spanish Civil War. And I look upon them as having the same morality, and I look upon them as being willing to do the same kind of violence en masse.
Well, I mean, obviously, the January 6th, you know, arrests and trials, that was violence. It was done under the color of law, but it was violence. You certainly know if it was violent if you were in a dungeon for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years, and you were assaulted in prison, which many were, or the FBI raided your house and dragged you out in the middle, early morning in your underwear in front of your family, which happened to Mark Hawk, or if the FBI is visiting you because you're questioning your school board about the curriculum promoting sodomy or DEI or whatever, or other things at your school, which happen to a lot of parents. When that's implied violence, obviously, when the FBI shows they're there to intimidate. But you're saying it could escalate because they're going to have to step it up. What you're saying is, in order to win, the enemies have to be vanquished and dispersed, and proverbially put up against the wall and taken care of, right?
That's the way they look at having to. The only way that they can end this, they're seeing this as an existential threat. I mean, you can see some of the language that's being used by their mouthpieces in the press, and um, the way I look at it is, I mean, the only way you stop these people is you're going to have to stop these people,
Well,
and
they're
they need to be,
Bolsheviks.
yeah, they need to be dealt with, and
Yeah.
there's only one way. I mean, you have options when it comes to dealing with them,
Mhm.
and there's a very legal way of doing it, and then there's a very legal way of doing it. um, and then there's the chaos way of doing it. You don't want the chaos way of doing it. Anybody who's read Last Crusade by Warren H. Carroll knows what the chaos way
I have a
is.
copy of it right here.
Yeah. And yeah, that's one of the most, I read the whole book on my podcast to see. I think there's one other book that I had to stop because I was getting emotional, stop reading in the middle of recording it because of just the contents of it. But yeah, I mean, I don't, I guess that if there's any real the black pill to me is I can survive anything. I plan on surviving anything. The black pill to me is that these people regain power and they want revenge. And this time it's not going to be the FBI. It's not going to be the FBI coming to put you in jail and you're going to have judges laughing at you. It's going to be the other thing. And people can say that that's hyperbolic. I know my history. I know the French Revolution. Warren Carroll has a book, a book on the French Revolution as well. This is not, yeah, this
Well, the
we're in dire
Vendée
straits now.
the Vendée did happen.
Yeah.
And so there's precedent for these things. And they do, obviously they believe in violence, and they're dedicated to their cause, and they're obsessed with power. They've been nudged aside for the time being, but yeah, obviously they've proven they cannot be trusted with power, because not only are they terribly corrupt, is they also they don't shy away from abusing it.
Yeah, and when you take into consideration how basically they've turned certain groups into martyrs, like trans people, like people who are directly being targeted um, by uh, this new administration, saying, "Nope, cutting off funding. You're one of two genders now." Officially, I mean, you're still going to have, you're still going to have schools and states and everything, but according to the federal, which most people who, unfortunately think that federal politics is everything when they should be really concentrating locally. Um, these are people, they have groups now that they can fight in the name of. And whenever you have, when you have people who can put, the, carry the banner of an oppressed class. I mean, just look at, I mean, we know that the American war, our war, wasn't about slavery, but it was that was used as propaganda to, make, get professors in the North to join in the fight. So
Yeah,
they have a history.
Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Yeah.
They have a history of taking the marginalized and raising a flag and saying we need to, and when it comes down to it, well, what do they say? The only good fascist is a dead fascist. That fascists are, it's our communists are perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine for someone to believe in communism, but if somebody is too right wing, then we showed how we handled them at Nuremberg. We show how we handled them, after the war. We showed how we handle them by alleging somebody did crimes in Germany and then putting them on trial in Israel. They showed how they handle people who are too right wing. That anyone to the right of Jonah Goldberg. No, you're not gonna. That's too much for them. That's too much for them. So, yeah, yeah, need to be prepared for this.
Yeah, people don't realize when you say, well, you have to fight, Nazis or fascists. You realize they consider you a Nazi and a fascist because you don't want to chop your son's penis off or cut your daughter's breast off. So
well, you're denying you're denying who they are. You're telling them that they don't exist. That's what they say. That's what they honestly say. If people have, I know it's very hard to listen to these people because they're ridiculous. And even if you're listening to them, you dismiss them as ridiculous, but sometimes sit down and listen to what they're actually saying. Take it in. You don't have to take it seriously. You just have to understand it. You just have to understand what they're saying and the consequences of belief.
It's interesting that Donald Trump has stopped uh, using the term leftists and calls them lunatics,
Well, I mean,
which is a good way to, it's either, you're the sane versus the lunatics, right? The sane versus the insane. And obviously, the past few years, things have gotten so bizarre with the transgender agenda and the idea of identity politics going as far as it did. They just went too far, and it's like no one can can take this seriously, but they are very serious about promoting it. I mean, it's look at all the funding, look at all the money that USAID was devoted to this, look at all the federal programs. Look at Letitia James in New York is suing uh, in federal court, I think, to stop the cutting off of funds to the hospital up there, or the order rather to cease all what they call gender affirming care. And you have these wackos turn out, Muslim women, by the way, protesting. You have that idiot, what was it, Cynthia Nixon, the actress, who said that I have a son who's transgender, I have a nephew who's transgender, and a niece who's transgender.
what are the
You
odds?
know, does that tell you something? It's like,
What are the
yeah,
odds that you would have that? What are the odds that
yeah,
the actress Megan Fox, all of her kids are trans?
yeah. It's a clear, obvious. It's a social contagion promoted by the higher ups. The Pritzkers, the governor of Illinois, who it would be great to see his fat ass arrested. And Trump, and again, when he's locking horns with the courts over the border or funding, uh, basically he can make the argument he's defending the national security. He's defending the country at this point, especially when it comes to something like the border issue, which is clear. It all depends on how you want to spin it. But if the border is being overrun, he has a duty. He would have a duty to ignore the courts, to bypass all to defend the border. He can make that case, and arrest anybody who's like a governor or a mayor who's involved in promoting sanctuary cities and these things. Right now, it's the cutting off of funding. I think Pam Bondi suggested that people might be arrested. The attorney general.
Yeah, I think didn't Letitia James and the other guy up there, they've been barred from federal buildings or something like that.
Oh, really? So,
Yeah.
hmm.
Yeah, I heard there was something came down saying they couldn't go into federal buildings or they'd be arrested.
Did she break down into
Um,
a Negro spiritual?
the, it's
That's another thing
amazing,
you see,
isn't
right?
it?
The performative aspect of it all. They still think they can
Yeah,
invoke Selma, Alabama, or the bridge in what was
yeah.
the bridge? They invoked the civil rights.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
the yeah. Well, the
Teddy,
you
what
were
was the name?
talking about.
What was the name of the bridge
Uh,
there?
oh, I can't remember. I can't remember. I know
Yeah,
where you're talking. I know where you're talking about. I
yeah.
can see it in my mind. I just can't remember the name. Yeah, you were talking about how it's basically a social contagion,
Hmm.
and I think back to I've heard Scott Adams say a couple times that okay, so even if you even if you don't like Israelis and you don't like Israel, you have to understand that Gaza, like the people in Gaza, they've been trained from an early age to hate them, to hate these people.
Hmm.
So even if you're trying to find a solution that doesn't include like taking into consideration people's mental health, then what okay, we're going to get rid we're going to send them to another country. Okay, but there's still hate there. You're going to, we'll make it a two-state solution. Okay, there's still hate there. Well, what do you do? Now, I if it wasn't if a certain group didn't have so much control over this country, I wouldn't even care about something like that. The reason I bring that up is let's bring it here. What do you do with these people? These people are mentally ill. You know, academic agent Nima Parvini came up with this phrase a couple of years ago where he said, we can't call ourselves far right. We have to call ourselves sensible centrists. He goes, because what we believe is sensible. They're the crazy ones. And I wasn't, I dismissed it at that time, but it really does. And even if you don't like it, it makes sense when you think about it. What, nothing you or I believe is radical. It's actually normal. It was actually, as Evola said, before the French Revolution, it was what any well-born man believed. And now it is considered to be radical. And they consider it to be more radical than, well, I'm going to transition my child at the age of like 3, 4, 5 years old. My child knew they were a different gender when they were 4 years old. But, Big Balls, who's probably 19 years old, he can't work in the government, even though he's like this, savant, this computer savant. But that's just saying, what if the roles were reversed, and calling out their hypocrisy. But this is a contagion. This is a mental illness on the part of people who are very unstable. How do you deal with that? It's the same thing as people the Israelis and the Gazans, who hate each other, who want to kill each other. Well, the problem is in this country is I don't wake up every morning thinking about killing people. I don't wake up every morning thinking radical thoughts. I think rather normal thoughts. But there's this other group over there who hates my normal thoughts, and their ideas and their beliefs are so insane and so out of line and so dangerous that when you think about them, you're like, man, there may be only one way to deal with this. And then you have to check yourself to make sure that you don't turn into them. You don't become so possessed with it, but you also have to resign yourself to the fact that this is the enemy. And if somebody else doesn't take care of them, if this regime that's taken charge now doesn't find a way to deal with them once and for all, we're just going to be dealing with them in the future. And how do we do that, Tim?
If you were to capture an image of me right now, sitting at my desk, behind me, you would not see a piece of paper charting the decline of the Jewish population in America. You know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, Potok. His name Potok? Mark Potok?
Southern Poverty Law Center at the time was working, liaising with the FBI. That shows just how the psychosis, how crazy, and he just presumes this is normal to work to the decline of the ethnic white population in the United States. He's working to do that, and he's working with federal agencies to achieve this. And
it's not only normal. It's not only normal, it's necessary.
Yeah. To just, whiteness is oppression. Therefore, you have to destroy oppression. You have to destroy whiteness. That's Noah Ignatia. He was a tenured professor. Was it Harvard? Harvard?
I don't know. I haven't looked up his background.
Ignatia. But anyway, he and of course, then he.
Noel Ignatieff.
Yeah. Harvard. He was tenured, and he said that. And you must destroy white. Now, to destroy whiteness, you have to destroy the culture, the identity of ethnic whites. And the first step for doing that was reducing them to being white, by the way. Going after there. I read a quote, Oliver Cromwell, and he was frustrated with the Irish because they just simply wouldn't die not fast enough. And says you can't change these people because the moment the more pressure you put on them, the more they pray to their God and their rosaries. And that's one thing they did a number on us. They denied so many Americans an religious ethnic identity, and left them very vulnerable to the corruption that all America has to offer. And which is funny because Donald Trump, in many ways, as a flawed vessel as he is sort of he embodies. His tumultuous career is symptomatic of a problem with the American identity itself. The mass psychosis that you were illustrating there, explaining there, it's so many crazy people. And anyway, millions, legions of crazy people deluded, completely broken from reality. They are simply the diseratum or the victims of modernity itself. And so now we're getting that's the problem. It's not just we're dealing with a deeply spiritual question here. How it's going to, and I think we're seeing how it's playing out politically. And it's going to be very imperfect politics. I mean, I like my theology to be perfect. My politics, I'm mature enough to realize my politics can't be perfect. And I think we're seeing that play out in the Trump administration, the second administration, where we're seeing these conflicts with the administrative state going after USAID, these apparent administrative actions regarding immigration, exposing corruption at the Pentagon, talking about reducing the Pentagon budget by 50%. That gets you shot. All right.
That not only gets you shot, it gets your family threatened.
Yes.
It gets, yeah. I mean, I remember somebody on Twitter back in, I think it was December of 2023, they had announced Bukele had gotten reelected in El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a picture of him with his family. And somebody retweeted the picture of him with his family and said, right now, in the Pentagon, there are people looking at this picture, dreaming about killing every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's who we're dealing with. That's who, and then, yeah, these are people with power, and they control these roving bands of lunatics on the street who kill people.
So it turns out with USAID, the more we look in the funding, all that 2020 nonsense.
Yep. Oh, it's going to go. But if they ever open the books on USAID and show it everything, you're going to see it go back decades. You're going to see it go back to. You're going to stuff that we've forgotten, Tim, at our age. We're the same age. Mm-hmm. Stuff that we've forgotten, USAID was responsible for.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And all that violence, the media coverage, how it was spun, all that USAID was responsible for, and they fed it through various LLCs. It's a money laundering operation. This is what you do when you're smuggling drugs and trying to launder the money. But a forensic investigation will expose it, and I think it is. The problem is once they expose it, these were crimes against the state, crimes against the American people, and they can continue to be. There's got to be some accountability for it.
And it's going to be hard to find a lot of it because, I mean, let's face it, money's fungible. Mm-hmm. Data Republican on Twitter has a search engine where you can search basically all nonprofits, grants, NGOs, things like that. And you have to be careful with it. Like, I used to be a part of a nonprofit and it shows up on there.
Oh yeah,
and I know for a fact that we weren't. I know who was financing us, and it wasn't USAID. It was like one person was financing us like 99%, and the other was just from small donations.
Well, it turns out the $218.37 I get on Substack is from USAID.
It'd be interesting to find out. Yeah, I mean, but once they start going through there and you start seeing, okay, well, sure, there are some names there that you wonder. It says, because it'll break it down. It'll say, okay, this is how much person makes, how much came from taxpayer funds, how much came from grants, and taxpayer, it'll say 0. And you still wonder about that. Like, because like I said, money's fungible. It can go through, it can pass through 15 different proxies before it hits whoever it hits, and it looks like it came from a private individual in the end. And we know that there were news outlets that were getting paid to do this. And I mean, news outlets get paid to promote things openly. I mean, if you watch Meet the Press or any of the Sunday morning things, you'll see like commercials for Boeing. Okay, who's watching Meet the Press is either in the, when I watch it, I'm not thinking, I need to buy a 737. Well, definitely don't want to buy a 737, and I don't want to buy missiles. So who is this for? Oh, and what about the pharma ads? Who are all these pharma ads for? Oh, this is to pay off the news stations so they don't report on these things. So they don't talk about the military industrial complex.
Mhm.
Or when they do talk about the military industrial complex, Rand Paul brings it up and Wolf Blitzer goes, "Do you know how many people would lose their jobs if if we started closing, if we started addressing this subject, Senator?"
Or did you see
Or
that? Did you see the
that
stocks drop on Lockheed Martin and when Trump floated that idea of cutting the budget?
yeah,
They,
that always, I mean, it's always going to happen. And I don't know what I've only been paying attention to a very narrow um, set of stocks that you know I'm looking at, like forward looking stocks. I'm not looking at stuff that really exists right now. But I mean, I don't know what pharma stocks did when RFK Jr. got um, was confirmed. But I would think that if RFK Jr. does what he says he's going to do, if he does 75%, if he does half of what he says he's going to do, pharma is going to take a massive hit.
Mhm.
And I'm here for it. I'm looking forward to it. Might even short some stocks in order to, when the time comes.
Well,
But
when you're trying to
yeah,
reform a system as bad as as corrupt as economic system, political system, the GDP is going to have to take a hit. I mean, you're not going to get growth because we haven't been getting growth really. We've gotten statistical growth, but obviously, if you look at how the wealth's been distributed, the concentration of wealth, and then by that the concentration of power in our society, it's obviously gone in the wrong direction. It simply doesn't support the idea of America being a democratic, meritocratic, broad middle class society. It's become an oligarchic, top heavy system, which is inherently unstable.
sure. And some people can say, with having Musk at the head of this, no one has benefited from it more than him, with contracts and things like
Hmm.
that. And sure, I mean, all 100% true.
Well, who's going to
But
talk? Who's going to be effective? Some employee at some working some cubicle or some owner of a small business. No, it's going to have to be influential, powerful people that deal with this. You're not
it's
going to get
always
it. You're not going.
influential.
Yeah, you're not going to get a storming of the Winter Palace, right? You're not going to get that. Didn't happen anyway, right? That was just a
Yeah.
Bolshevik propaganda film. You show these grand gestures, if you will, the revolution. That's looking at some of the black pillars out there because they're not getting the revolution. Everything is controlled, and it doesn't mean anything. And they're saying, sure, you get a little of what you want here. Things may get better here. They may prolong it a little bit by another century. It says, well, isn't that politics?
That's politics. Yeah, that's politics.
I mean,
And yeah,
this side of paradise, you don't get that. I mean, just they're not living in reality at some point.
it was, one of the reasons I stopped being a libertarian and talking about libertarianism and actually started going after it is because of the purity spiraling. Is there was the perfect the perfect was always the enemy of the good. And then I come on over, to this side of things, and I realize that it's the same thing over here. And when you have an ideology, I mean, there's no ideology doesn't exist. It's power. You have personal ideology that you live your life by, but it's just power,
Mhm.
and it's defeating your enemies. And that's all it is rewarding your friends. And what do they say? Liberty for my friends, the law for my enemies.
Mhm.
That's what it is. That's all you can hope for. You're not going to ever get your perfect little thing. It just isn't going to happen. We're not perfect people. You're not. I'm not a perfect person. And then if I get together with a whole bunch of other people, now there's 15 imperfect people. Things are not going to go well. And if we expect things to be perfect, then we're just going to be warring and at each other's throats. Oh, am I describing social media at all? Where it's like, well, you don't talk about the Jews enough. Really? I don't? I don't? Me? You're talking about me? Oh, okay. Well, why? Because I realize that that with Trump in office, Jews are going to there are certain factions of Jewish power that are going to get their way.
Mhm.
It's just that anyone who was in there, that was going to happen because our guys aren't getting elected because it doesn't seem like we can ever get one of our guys to run for office without them spurging out and saying stupid shit or carrying tiki torches. I mean, really?
Yeah.
Look, I know I'm never going to get elected. I've said stuff. There's there's hours and hours of me spewing, spewing things that make me unelectable. I'm never going to get elected to anything. Maybe locally because they like me. My neighbors like me, but
A certain
never,
precinct in Idaho or something.
yeah, yeah. But if you think you're going to get elected by going out there and just screaming about the Jews and calling everybody who disagrees with you a Jew, I'm sorry, you're just a spurg. And there's a
Oh,
reason
they don't
why.
call you a Jew. They say you just work for them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have that J.D. Vance's speech at Munich, right? And then you have Trump calling for
Tim,
the end.
Tim, Tim. He's married to an Indian. He's
Yeah,
friends with Peter Thiel. Come on.
and he wears eyeliner.
Oh, yeah. Do you know when he was in college, he once like put on drag at like a party?
Oh no.
Everyone who comes at me with like the JD Vance stuff, I'm going, okay, can you show me something you disagree with since he's become a Catholic?
That doesn't happen. It's all fake.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
He,
Is he playing a
Peter
political game?
Peter Thiel
Yes.
has him. Peter Thiel has him playing. Peter Thiel has him playing. Of course, he's playing a political game. You have to play a political game. You
He's a
can't get
politician.
elected. Yeah, you can't get elected.
I mean, but that speech now, when he talks about censorship and immigration in Europe and calling out all these bureaucrats and politicians who he said you're treating your people like the enemy. Your problem, your threat isn't Russia. He's pretty much said it's the governments in Western Europe. Now he didn't go on and talk about all the censorship in the United States, which is carried out a little differently. I understand that. Um, and you have Trump. It's like I think it was Ramsey Paul. He said you have Trump, who's literally Hitler, meeting with proposing to meet with Putin, who's literally Hitler. What happens when Hitler appeases Hitler? Mind
Yeah,
blown.
yeah, it's just. I mean,
um,
that's what it. That's all it is now. Is okay. Well, we're just gonna. Well, it's not working. It's not working, and it almost. If you wanted to interpret that another way, it's like, well, we're dealing. We have tons of problems in the United States,
mhm.
and we're trying to work them out. It's not going to be perfect, but we're trying to work them out.
Did you see
You
the Steve
guys,
Bannon interview
if
about that?
no, I didn't. No,
There's a
tell me.
very now Steve Bannon, obviously a flawed character, um, but he was talking about how Trump. You have this agenda. What's this agenda of? He said that basically the Trump administration is trying to organize what they call hemispherism, which is going back to Monroe Doctrine, spheres of influence, making basically working it out with China, extricating the United States from Europe, working out with Russia, and dealing with our hemisphere. And of course, what that involves again is a reshoring, sort of building up a tariff system, getting rid of maybe income tax. This is revolutionary stuff, but this is and he's saying this is, and you see Marco Rubio talking about something. Now, Marco Rubio to me was always kind of a laughable character, Then he stepped as a senator because he's just as neocon stooge, right? Or a Jewish stooge. Then he steps into the position of Secretary of State and he's making sense about Ukraine, not getting in the NATO. This is crazy. He's making cogent remarks that make sense. The same thing with Pete Hegseth, right? He's this lunatic Zionist who wants to build the third temple and bring on the Antichrist. But all of a sudden, he gets in this position, and he's carrying out these sensible reforms in the Pentagon. There was an interview, I think you with Tucker Carlson, and the guy was he at the from the American Conservative.
Yeah, the American Conservative. Oh God, I can't remember his name right now. He actually,
Mills.
yeah, Kurt Mills. Yeah,
Kurt
he
Mills. Kurt
actually,
Mills.
he,
Yeah.
I followed him on Twitter, and he actually followed me back. I wonder if he has unfollowed since then.
But he was talking about if you look at the people that Hegseth and some of these people surround themselves in, they're very skeptical. For one thing, very skeptical of Israel and the Zionists and all that. And so he was suggesting that despite Hegseth's sort of lunatic remarks regarding the third temple, is that he's had sort of a change of heart about some of these things in the past few years, which was promising because it's kind of like you have to realize these people, when they're put in these slots, they're human beings, and they do have changes. They do their views do change. They're not just cogs.
Even billionaires.
Yeah.
We've seen billionaires change. Now, people could say, well, that's just in their self-interest. Okay, does their self-interest at all align with yours? Maybe a little bit. Is it, I mean, would you rather if they if theirs aligns with ours a little bit? I mean, was the old regime, the Biden regime, the Kamala Harris regime, was there any hope? Oh no, but if we like we were celebrating the J6 people getting out of being let out of jail and being pardoned, and people were like, well, no, it's better to keep them in there because look what happened when Hitler went to jail. I'm like, when Hitler went to jail, he became de-radicalized and realized he de-radicalized in the sense that he realized, I have to do this legitimately and I have to get elected.
I have to be appointed to something.
Yeah, it's like you think boomers. First of all, this is basically populism, which doesn't work. It's always elites.
That's
So
right. He went from the beer hall putsch, storming the barricades, if you will, get arrested. Oh, I have to put on a coat and tie and play the political game. You're right. Yes.
Yeah. So,
and by the way, I make that observation without. I'm not warning, making a warning from history that, that Trump is Hitler. Or like I'm just making the observation in order to carry out whatever reforms he deemed necessary in a response to the turmoil of Weimar Germany. He had to pursue legitimate political path to power, which he did pursue and he did achieve, by the way. So.
Correct, and that's the only way. That's the only way it's going to happen. So, one of the things that drove me like I was saying before, one of the things that drove me crazy was I left libertarianism because it was just this whole purity spiral, and then I get over here and it's just over to wherever I am, and the people who listen to me, and not all of them. I mean, as a matter of fact, the overwhelming majority are actually really good people who want to hear logical, realistic, realpolitik. But then you just have people who are like, well, I can't deal with realpolitik because Jews still exist.
And they always will until they convert. But then that's theology. My theology is perfect. My politics is practical. And I need to practice discretion and prudence to somehow bridge the two. And that's where you have to be an adult. And then also pray daily. That's
a rosary a day will really start setting you straight.
Yes, and you keep. And so well, it's good that they're in prison. Well, speak for yourself.
Yeah.
Well, it's not. There's your
families.
The
person who says that has no one. If you say that, you have no one.
Same thing with the accelerationist, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, oh, well, I would love to see the government just fall. Okay, are you ready to take care of your grandparents and your great grandparents? Oh, well, we're going to have Bitcoin. Oh, are you? Or we're gonna,
no, I want the system.
Everybody's going to want to be a national socialist. If the government just fell apart tomorrow, everybody's going to want to be a national socialist.
I want the system to collapse, utterly collapse, utter anarchy, and make sure that my mother-in-law and father-in-law still have their pensions, so I don't have to take care of.
It
Think it,
goes back
think it
to
through, right?
Patrick.
Just think
Yeah,
it through. I mean,
it goes back to Patrick Deneen talking about when people,
yeah,
people say there was no liberty before, the Enlightenment, or it's like, no, there was. It was, but it had more to deal with responsibility. What the Enlightenment did was it destroyed the idea of liberty being tied to responsibility.
yeah, duties and rights, right? Rights and duties, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, no best oblige, obligate responsibilities, and an idea that there was a God looking at you, so you better do overlooking everything. So, yeah, I mean, so I said I'd have you an hour, so I'm not going to keep you any longer. I think kind of we covered it. We didn't get kind of a sense of your idea of what was going on in the first 28 days of the Trump administration, which has been more encouraging and certainly more interesting than I think most expected, which is probably upsetting a lot of people because they don't know how to, who wants to have their paradigm smashed, whether
Well,
it's,
some people,
yeah.
well, I mean, also some people are so used to losing, they can't win. They
Yeah,
won't take a win, or they won't be able to let's put it this way: they won't be able to recognize a win.
yeah. There's that thing where Trump administration actually said something, cut off aid to South Africa because of his treatment of the white South Africans. I think they referred to them as a certain class or group of people. It didn't say whites per se, but if you know what they were talking about, particularly the farmers, what's been going on there, they're cutting off aid to South Africa because of the violation of people's civil liberties there. And then, of course, what's listed one of the reasons is South Africa's criticism of Israel. And some people say, well, there you go. It's completely illegitimate because they had to mention Israel. You know,
Well, I mean, if whites in South Africa are benefit by, I don't know, I was saying recently that somebody with a whole bunch of money could hire, like they did in Sierra Leone. They
yeah.
hired executive outcome, and executive outcome went in there and just like demolished the lunatics. That could happen. We'll get somebody could do that. We have people who are. I've been talking about this a lot lately, trying to mention it as much as possible. Um, the left funds and gives money and patronage networks to their radicals, and the right people on the right cancel theirs.
Hmm.
So you there are people who could fund privately. I'll sound like a libertarian for 5 seconds. Privately fund solving that problem in South Africa.
Letters of marks and reprisal.
It'd be so beautiful,
If the
wouldn't it?
political will is there.
Some nice Heinz helicopters coming in there, just like in Sierra Leone.
Eric Prince, is he listening? You could get that. Yeah, what, like 1,200 committed mercenaries going to just clear government there.
Oh, they've done it before.
Uh, uh, well, obviously, in USAID, of course, we started this discussion talking about USAID. They boast that they were pivotal in bringing down the apartheid regime in South Africa.
Yeah, that's
You're
something to
you're
brag
you're
about.
you're welcome.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, you just move on. That's progressivism, though. They just move on, don't look back, right? The consequences were destruction. They reap, and then they move on and say you're welcome, and just move on. It never ends.
Chaos is just another opportunity for people to say that they need them for something.
Hmm. So, well, Pete, I'm gonna let you go. I know you have something else to do tonight, so I want to thank you for coming back on the show.
Well, I appreciate it, Tim. Anytime, and have you on again soon.
Good. Yeah, just send me a note. I'm sure we can work something out. Take it easy.
Take care. Thank you.
Good night. Bye bye.